Ire were were ni taochu. Ire were were.
Hello and welcome to Conversations with Mother Earth, brought to you by Grounded Press. My name is Dana Petrovic, and each week, my guests and I explore one aspect of Mother Earth and the gifts that she gives us. We also discuss why these gifts are so precious and why we should value them. Got you curious? Good. We love curiosity. Let's begin. Today, I am taking you to the cradle of humankind, to Africa. We will be visiting Nigeria, at least virtually, a country in West Africa known for its oil reserves. And of course, being the largest country on the continent. Nigeria is also one of the world's most multicultural and ethnically diverse nations, with more than 250 ethnic groups. However, Nigeria is even richer with another resource. Which could that be? Stories. Nigeria is a country rich in storytelling. Electricity might be a recent phenomenon that brought Nigeria and the world not only light, but also soon thereafter radio, TV, and internet. However, storytelling is as old as humanity. And Nigeria, as one would expect with its cultural richness and diversity, is blessed with the legacy of storytelling. My guest today is the best-selling author Yejide Kilanko, born and raised in Nigeria, but now living in Ontario, Canada. Yejide's first novel, that was published in 2012, Daughters Who Walk This Path, transports readers to her native Nigeria, telling a story of a spirited and very intelligent young girl, Morayo, that brings attention to the kind of violence many women suffer in silence. After reading this extraordinary novel, I became a big fan of Yejide Kilanko's work. Hence, it's no surprise, it is an incredible honor for me to welcome one of my favorite authors as my guest today. Yejide, welcome to Conversations with Mother Earth.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you. And thank you for the support all over these years. It has been, thank you. I value that. Thank you.
It's my pleasure because I really love your work. So I'm very pleased to talk to you about the topic that is very dear to my heart today. And I think you are the perfect partner for this. So our readers, our listeners might not know much about, some of them might not know about your work. So tell us a little bit about your background and more about Nigeria's cultural diversity. And of course, the importance of the topic of the storytelling.
Okay, so I was born in Ibadan, Nigeria, which is in southwestern Nigeria. At one time, it was the biggest city in Africa. And I was born to a university professor who was a vet doctor. And so he was a vet doctor and also taught at University of Ibadan. So I grew up within back home, professors live on campus, right? So you grew up within the university campus. And I was the first of 5 children. And yeah, it was a fun childhood. It really was. I had parents who were very hardworking, and they valued education. They valued the importance of reading, of the first books that I read were bought by my parents. And they always encouraged me to read. My dad had a stellar library. And so growing up in that house, you couldn't help being a critical thinker. Because I remember when I was less than 10 when I read Roots by Alex Haley, and my dad was like, "Are you sure you really understood what you read?" And then he actually got the miniseries. I remember watching the miniseries
Wow.
and understanding how, and I think that was my first exposure to comparing a book to the
To the
movie.
movie, yes. And
Like, you
was
know,
it a
how
positive one?
it was, because I think it just shows you different ways of telling a story, because that's what it, like, different mediums, right? That one story can be told in different ways. And so that was my exposure to that. And as you mentioned, Nigeria is, I think, we're the most populous Black country in the world. There's a
Yes.
lot of us, lots and lots of us. We're vibrant people. We have many ethnicities in terms of, and so I think even in terms of language, we have over like 250 different dialects. So I'm a Yoruba woman, and we have three major tribes. So the Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa. So I'm a Yoruba woman. And across all our different tribes, and oral tradition is very strong, like in terms of
Yes.
how we pass on knowledge and proverbs. And for those who've read Daughters Who Walk This Path, every chapter in the book has a proverb as its heading. And that heading, that proverb kind of informs how, kind of, gives you an idea of what's to come, right? And today I was actually having a conversation with my daughter about writing, one proverb came to my head, a Yoruba proverb that says, "Aboro laso fomoluabi, toba dinoe adodidi," which means, if you give it a literal translation, says you only speak in partial words to somebody of honor, somebody who has knowledge. So when they kind of dwell on it, then it becomes a full sentence, like in terms of how we pass on information. So it was a very fun, conversation with my daughter, who was born in North America. So even though she's born to African Nigerian parents, she can, she's also raised here. So her way of seeing the world is different. So we talked about the difference of how perhaps a story told through a Western lens might say, or even not, perhaps not even a conversation. Let's say in a conversation, I said, "Oh, I really wouldn't do that if I were you." Or, "Have you thought about maybe doing that differently?" What that person is telling you is like, "I really don't think you should do that." But in Nigeria, we say, "Don't do that. Are you not thinking?" Like, we're like very direct, right? Like very direct in terms of how we pass on, things we say. So our stories in a way, and so I think our stories in a way may not, they kind of offer you this kernel of wisdom,
Yeah.
and then you're meant to take it, and then you're meant to sit with it, and then you're meant to think, okay, how does this inform my life, or what do I want to do with this knowledge that's been passed on to me?
Exactly. Exactly.
So we definitely have a very rich, Nigerian writers are world known for,
Yes.
for wonderful, writing, whatever genre, like, literary, commercial, science fiction, drama, poetry, children's fiction, like, it's just as, very multifaceted. Like, so it's a privilege to be part of that, to come from such richness.
Yeah, such a rich heritage, rich roots.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely. How many languages are actually official languages in Nigeria?
Well, English. It's
English.
the only official language. And that is, of course, as a result of colonialism, right? Because we
Yeah.
used to be a British colony.
Yeah.
And so that English is our official language. When I was in school, the boarding school that I went to for secondary school, we were allowed, we had to take a different language from ours. So like I mentioned earlier, there are three major tribes. So the Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa. So if you're a Yoruba student, you have to take a different, language. But in terms of, and that's one of the things that's kind of sad, because in some ways our languages are kind of dying, let's say dying out to an extent, because the younger generation, a lot of the children don't speak or can't even read.
Yeah.
Can't
That is,
read the language.
that is
I kind
yeah.
of taught myself how to read Yoruba
Oh,
because
really?
I wasn't taught in school. So I was, I'm more, and I'm not even that, like I'm a learner,
Yeah.
and so that is kind of sad. And it's a tonal language, so you have to learn how to put the tones, and so that's one thing that I wish we focus more on teaching our indigenous languages
Yeah.
to the younger people, because if not, I wonder what would happen in 50 years. In
Exactly.
terms, I'm hoping that more people realize the importance of learning your language, because it grounds you. The
Yes.
language is not just the in terms of dictionaries, in terms of the stories, in terms of the worldview, in terms of the values. There's so much attached to language.
Yes. It strengthens your roots. We have to
Yeah,
strengthen our roots first and
yeah,
foremost. This is our identity. It's who we are. I
yes,
I agree, and it's this unfortunate phenomenon around the world that cultural heritage and languages are getting more and more lost, and with
yes,
that, all the richness that goes with it.
yes,
Um, but Yejide, you lived in a in Ibadan, which is
yes,
not the capital. Sorry, Ibadan, but it's still a huge city. It's over six
yes.
million people. Correct me if I'm wrong. So how was it for you to live in such a big city with all the tribes mixed? How did that influence your storytelling?
I think perhaps not my storytelling, but perhaps my worldview. Because growing up in the midst of because everybody came to teach, right? So we have people from different tribes who are also professors, lecturers in different, and so I was exposed to their families, their children, their food, their ways of doing things. So it made me definitely more open-minded.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't just like, okay, I got to learn about different cultures. And even when I went away to boarding school, because the part where my school that was set in the a state where was an Igbo people were the predominant tribe there. So it's an entirely different language, entirely different way of doing things. So I think living within the university, having access to books, having access to even going to watch watch plays, the theater, like different things, like it engages your mind as a child.
Yes.
Like in terms of, okay, this is, yeah, you live here in Ibadan in Nigeria, but the world is way bigger than this. And that interconnectedness of like, okay, you can find your place in, like, somebody else is living in London and you can have the same experiences. I have a friend, we always talk about how interesting she grew up here in Canada, in Ontario, in a smaller town. And we would like, oh my God, I know that song. And we always think like, she was born a year after me, that we're living on two different continents and we're having the same experiences.
Yes.
Like so I think growing up, I was able to realize that, or like even when I'll read a book that like was set in, I don't know, England somewhere that I had never been, but I could see myself in it, that I could understand that there were human beings like me, with fears like me, with feelings like me. And so I think growing up in, like, and then I was also experiencing that in real life, living with different, not just in terms of even ethnicity, different religions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Different ways of seeing life. So I think I truly am so grateful for that experience,
Yeah.
because it has served me well.
Mm-hmm.
That wherever I go, I'm able to, I'm a bridge builder in that sense, that I'm
Yes.
able to understand other people's way of seeing things,
Yes.
that I'm able to reach out and say, okay, you know what, this is new to me, but I want to learn, teach me, right? And so I think growing up in that environment has been, yeah, it was a blessing. I'm so
Beautiful.
thankful, very
Yes, and of
thankful.
course now living in a country like Canada, which is
Yes,
also very multicultural and very
yes,
diverse, because everybody came from somewhere.
yes.
Um, you fit right in. Um, Dear listeners, Yejide is, as I mentioned earlier, a best-selling author, and she could simply focus on her writing and course, she has indeed received a very high acclaim for her consequent works after The Daughters Who Walk This Path. Her next books were Chasing Butterfly, then her first Chasing Butterflies, then her first children's book, The Elephant in the Wardrobe. And she has an upcoming novel, A Good Name.
Yes.
But writing is not the only vocation for Yejide. She is also a therapist, helping children who suffered from a trauma. Yejide, I can imagine that your efforts as a therapist are very much rewarding, but sometimes also draining. How does storytelling fit into your work as a therapist?
Okay. So I mentioned earlier that I went to boarding school and so I went when I was 10, and it was hard. And so that's when I started writing. I was 12 when I started writing poetry. And so my poetry, my poems rather were more like, oh, ants, fields, and, because it was my way of processing everything I was going through. And when I went to university, I started writing. I joined the press because my very first degree was in political science, because I was going to be a lawyer. So that was my first dream and career dream. And so I wrote for my press. And so, but when I started working as a social worker in 2009, and I was exposed to, having to interview children who had been sexually abused, that was actually when I wrote my first novel manuscript. So in a way, my work was what led me through this path. Because my very first, so when a day I wrote a poem called Silence Speaks, and Silence Speaks was about a young girl who made a disclosure about being sexually abused. And that was what sparked the entire novel. So that poem actually became a scene in Daughters Who Walk This Path. So when I shared the poem on Facebook, and I got people actually who made disclosures to me, who said, oh, people said, I was sexually abused. And I was like, oh, I didn't, and of course, it's not something people talk about. And so I'm like, wow, so I decided to flesh out that poem, Silence Speaks, into a novel. Mm-hmm. And so over 6 months, it became a manuscript of I think it was 40,000 words. And then I had people read and they were like, oh, this is actually good. And so that was how Daughters Who Walk This Path came to be. It was actually because of my work. And so in a way, my work as a social worker, as a therapist, informs the things that I care about, informs the kind of the things I write about. If you look across my work so far, so I'm talking about child sexual abuse, domestic violence, talking about gender violence, talking about patriarchy, talking about mental health issues, anxiety. My next book, children's picture book, was Juba and the Fireball, which talks about anger management. The Good Name coming out talks about, immigration, cultural expectations. So in a way, when I start to write a story, it's because it's something I'm trying to explore for myself.
That's interesting.
So I'm trying to figure out, okay, how does this work?
Yeah.
What are things that I haven't considered? So I always say I'm my first audience, that I can only write really about things I care about. Because if I don't have a connection to the theme or to the story, it's hard for me to keep on going with it, especially when it's hard. But when I feel, because even with A Good Name, I started writing in 2010, and it's just going to be published next month. So we're talking about 11 years. It takes a commitment and perseverance to a belief in a particular story to stick with it that long. Yeah. And so that's why, because I know that, it's one thing to write, it's one thing to publish.
Yes.
Those are two different, one is, it's like publishing is a business. So it's not only, so when books get published, it doesn't mean they're the best books that get published. Right. And I think people need to, and for writers are like, oh, okay, what's wrong with my story? There's so many reasons why your story isn't being published. It's not because it's not good. Right. Mm-hmm. So, and I had to come to that acknowledgement myself and acceptance. And what does it, what does this mean for me as a writer? And what does it mean for my future as a writer? And I thought, okay, no matter whether I get published or not, I would always write, because that's the way I process my world. It's
Yes,
when an idea comes into my head, I'm like, I wonder what I could do with this. I
yes,
wonder what this character has to say about this. I
that's
wonder,
interesting.
yeah. So, and then we go on a journey together.
Oh, wow, that's
Then
beautiful.
we go on this journey of discovery together. And so I'm truly grateful for being able to write stories and being able to explore my world that way.
Yes, it's interesting to say that, because one of my current works, actually, my main protagonist is so different from me. And I chose that on purpose. But for example, she's a math genius, which I am. I'm not. I like math, but I am not a math genius. But I wanted to dive into the topic more. I wanted to understand it, what it takes to be a math genius. So it's exactly what you're saying. It's to be, to be on a journey with your characters. We discussed this earlier before. They are alive in our minds, so they are a true story for us.
Yes, they're real. They're real people with real, and they surprise you.
Yes.
They surprise you because you can have, because I write with an outline, but my outlines are not rigid. So it gives me a sense of, okay, this might be the direction I'm hoping to go with this story. But then and along the way, rather, something happened. I'm like, oh, okay, that's how you want to go. Okay, let's explore. Let's
Yes,
see where this
exactly,
would.
exactly. It's a story on its own, It becomes
Yeah, like, okay, that's how you want to go. Let's see what happens with that. Yeah. So and so I think, okay, you have a blueprint, but not to be attached to it. That you can be, you can be flexible. Because and it's a metaphor for life, right? This thing, life, it truly change just happens, and then you have to figure out, okay, in the midst of this change, what am I going to do with it?
Yes.
Where am I going? Where is my place in this change cycle? So yeah, it's
Interesting, very interesting.
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we are wired for stories. We have always been wired for stories, and we have to understand that for thousands and thousands of years, we were shaped by the stories, and we were. This is how our cultural how history was transported, how we learned about our cultural identity, as we discussed this earlier. And I mean, for us, it's so important that we even teach it in our communication and leadership training, because it is important to tell a story when we deliver a message. Otherwise, it doesn't stick. When you look back at your childhood, Yejide, and the time when you got your first stories, were there any stories about nature or Mother Earth? How was Mother Earth present in the cultural richness of Nigeria or Yoruba people?
Yeah. So I think when I think about that, I think about the Yoruba creation story. And it's funny, like different people have different creation stories. I was doing some training on indigenous culture in Canada, and it was interesting hearing the different creation stories across the different tribes. Yeah, like we were like, oh, so the Yoruba creation story talks about, so his name was Oduduwa. So Oduduwa, it's so the father, so that's more like the father of Yoruba people, and that how the earth was created with a chicken and some grains of sand. And that the earth formed because the chicken was kind of, kicking the grains of sand everywhere. And I was like, so, it was just, I was like, to today, like, I'm like, but that was how the earth was formed. It was by a chicken and some grains of sand. And I wish, but I'm sure that when that initial story was told, it would have more meaning. Like now I'm like, why was it a chicken?
Yeah.
Why was it not a mouse? Why was it not like, why was it the chicken that was chosen? And that's the thing with oral tradition, that things get missed. or things don't get passed down, depending on who's telling the story,
Yes.
and that the story changes. And I think that's, like that's where, the importance of, even when now listening to any story, is understanding that that story is being told through the lens of the storyteller, and that before you accept it as truth, you have to weigh it. Whose truth is it?
Yes, exactly. And
Right?
it's interesting, but Yoruba people then answer the question, what was there before, chicken or the chicken or the egg?
Yeah, so now I'm like, yeah, like I wonder, like, why was it the chicken? Like, I don't know. But yeah, like the chicken just kept throwing the sand, and the places where the sand grains fell became land. And then when the places where there were no sand grains was just water. So the idea that all before all this was water. Like, and in some ways, I think about that when we talk about, even in terms of our human bodies, in terms of composition, of how we are, a lot of our composition is water. So there's just something about water, I think. I don't know, it's
Yeah.
life anyway. Like, you can do without food for some time, but you die if you don't have water. There's just, so it's, and even across, whether it's one of the Christian story about, a creation story, there was water too, right? And even in some of the stories, when I read the indigenous thing, it was the same thing. There was water. So it's just, there's this water thread that just goes through most of the stories, and I wonder about that. And I think that's part of how storytelling happens. Like, for me, like, wonder why was water such a big, like a factor in those stories? Why? Like, like, I don't know, but that was in terms of, and then a lot of our stories, the Yoruba talk about, even like, of humans turning into rivers or turning into mountains. They would say, oh, there was this powerful human, and then something happened, and he got mad, and then, like, oh, like, so there's some rivers till now that they said there were humans before, but it turned into, and people worship them. The traditional worshippers, they worship those rivers. And, they say, oh, this used to be a man, or this used to be a woman, or this mountain used to be a human. So there's a connection between, like earth and like, I don't know, like, some things you wonder.
Yeah.
But one thing I know for sure, that that it's not all what we see. It's not just like, life is more than the physical realm. I believe that.
Yes, exactly.
And
And
that,
water
yeah.
will be one of the topics in our next one of the next episodes, because what obviously Yoruba people and other tribes in Nigeria understood, we cannot live without water. It's
Yes.
water is life. Water is life for all life on this beautiful planet of ours. So we have to go back to understanding that very, very simple logic, yet the life-saving one. We need clean waters.
Yes. Yeah.
We have to protect our oceans and our rivers and lakes and everything else.
Yes.
Yeah,
We do.
it's fascinating. Um, One topic that's kind of I have been thinking a lot about lately is of course, the world we live in and the constant buzz that we are exposed to. And in human history, when we look at the storytelling, there has never been an epoch where we hear so many words, and yet, regretfully, at least I have the impression, are don't have any meaning anymore. Our leaders make promises just to forget them maybe a few weeks later, because they know that we are busy with the buzz and we will forget that they made a promise in the first place. Do you have a feeling that we lost the connection to the true meanings of the words? Because when we look back during the days when our stories were transported and shaped our identity and history and everything, and when we made business in the past, made business decisions, our words meant a contract.
Mm-hmm.
And yet today we see people saying this and saying that, and kind of not really being committed to their words. Do you have the impression that words actually lost their meaning in today's world?
Hmm. I think, I don't know if in terms of losing the meaning, or we losing so not the words themselves losing the meaning, it's how we process them, right? Because so they, this is like they carry their own values, like how much value we put on them, right? So it's us who changed. Right, some values are still some values, like
Yes.
it's what we, and then even when we talk about when the contracts were made, then like in terms of, okay, we come together, we talk, and we both agree. But when the written word came, right, and now it's written down, and it's always through who's doing the writing down, right? Through what lens, with what intention, right? So the other things that now begin to take those words and they begin to change it. Yeah. So it's almost like it's the humans who took the stories and remade them to fit them into their own agendas.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true.
Right? So they took the stories, and then they, there's this famous proverb about until was it is it the it's something about until the animals begin to tell their stories, the stories will always glorify the hunters. Because the hunter goes like, yes, I went in there and I just shot my arrow and I was like, oh, I fought fiercely. Well, the animals can't tell their stories, so we don't know, right? It's what the hunters say, right? And so you now begin to think about who's telling the story.
That's true.
And for me, and that's why when, like even in terms of looking at, and looking at a word, like what are you trying to convey with, like having like first understanding that words matter, the meaning of words matter, and that people use words, you can weaponize them. You can weaponize them and use them to hurt people if you structure it, and then you can also use them for healing and for growth.
Yes.
Right. So yeah. So you as a storyteller have a responsibility.
Yes.
With the words that you say, the words that you choose, whatever format, whether you say them, you write them, you sing them, like recognizing your responsibility.
Yes.
And that you've been given, and the privilege that you've been given to be able to, impact other people with what you say. And I think that was why, like, if you look back in the old day, the storytellers, the bards, the ones they were like the big people in the community, because they could get everyone to sit down in a circle and listen to them.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So they had that clout to be able to, and so it's even recognizing that whatever story you're telling, whether it's not even like in terms of creative stories, whether you're telling the story within an organization, whether it's a memo, it's a press release, it's something, you are creating a narrative. Yes, and that there should be some responsibility about that.
That's a very good point that you're addressing, the responsibility, because we authors, our books are protected for 70 years after even we are not there anymore.
Yeah.
So this is a very long time in which our our words can shape somebody's mind, or even somebody's career or path that they choose in their lives.
Yeah. So whatever you are, whether you're a creative writer or not,
exactly,
just understanding that you are creating narrative with whatever you write.
Exactly. So we have to go back exactly to the topic of responsibility for our actions, responsibility for our words, and ideally it's also the enjoyment of telling the story, just sitting around the campfire. And we can still do this these days. We still have open space where we can go outdoors and enjoy the nature and sit outside and just simply listen to the dying fire. You know the sound of the dying fire. It's something very, very special. So that we experience that again, this understanding where our fantasy works again, and where we simply enjoy a story for it is a story.
So yeah, so I think that's the beauty of having, because I write about heavy topics, right? And it's not for everyone.
Yes.
And that's why the beauty of having We need to have diverse stories. It's not just the beauty of it, it's a necessity. You need things
Yes.
that would just make you happy, just make you laugh. Laugh can just not be heavy all the time. We need that release. So for me, people say, oh, okay, one kind of writing is serious or important. No, every piece of writing has value, is
Yes.
important, feels a need, and it's much welcomed. So I read across genre. I don't like, oh, like, so that's for me, it's important because it all, we life kind of all, we just, what's the, so it was something I saw recently that I think I caught my mind about, it's about light and darkness. It's like they each make you appreciate the other more. Like for you to be able to appreciate lightness, or you have to have seen darkness,
Yes. Yes.
right? Then you, oh yes, light. But if you have no concept of darkness, you would really fully grasp the value of lightness. And if you have no concept of things being bright and light, darkness, it's vice versa, that you need both, is
Yes.
that balance of life, right? And so as we're talking about, and so that's why sometimes for myself I'm like, I need, because I talk about heavy things, that I always remind myself that I need to get out of that space and just live life and find joy. I call it snatching joy. I find things that I snatch, because sometimes joy, I always say, like a fluffy bottom creature that wants to waddle away from me. And so I have to run after, like, hey, joy, come back here. you know,
Yes. Yes.
I have to like snatch it, like, you're staying, right? So it's always important. I think, and life shows us that, like, we have moments of just pure joy, moments of just content, stillness, like, so it's important to feel ourselves with as much light as we can, because sometimes darkness doesn't need to schedule, it would schedule itself, like, so we have to schedule the light for
Yeah.
ourselves. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's really important.
But your work is also very important in its heaviness, because we cannot ignore darkness. We cannot
No.
ignore drama. We cannot ignore certain, let's say, procedures or parts of a cultural heritage that are actually outdated, and that we have to shed light on them, to see the other side of them. So it's not, the darkness is heavy, and you said we have to balance it with light, but we have to continue writing also about darkness.
Yes.
This is why your work is so important.
Thank you. Thank you. Because I've heard people say, why don't you write happy stories? Like, why don't you? And some way I said, but that's what comes to me.
Yeah, no, we
Those
can't.
are the characters that come to me.
Your work is precious because of the darkness, and as I know how much strength it requires from you to write about darkness.
Yeah.
It takes so much toll on your own soul when you write about darkness, but it has to be done.
Yeah, thank you. I thank you for that. And sometimes I'm like, okay, next book I'm going to write something really lighthearted, and and I think in some ways that's why I'm thankful, because I write short stories as well. That I can, and I write short stories, I write poetry, I write children's fictions, I write, and so having been able to write in different forms gives me the space to step away.
Yeah.
And to do something else, and and as the years go by, I've learned the real importance of self-care.
Yes.
Of taking care of myself, of understanding, okay, this is enough now. You need to step away and do something else, or you need to live the story now. And so it's getting like, so that's something that I think all writers really need to focus on, as a self-care piece, because whatever it is that you're writing, it takes something from you.
Oh, it takes you into the world, its own whirlwind.
Yeah.
If you're not careful. Yes.
Yes, it takes something from you. And that one of the concepts I teach my children or my clients, I call them my kids, my work kids. My work kids would be, we talk about bucket filling and bucket dipping, that there are things in life that dip your bucket. right? So we all have this beautiful bucket. I always say mine has polka dots, it's purple, it's shiny, has glitter on it, and it's inside your body somewhere. And that things fill that bucket. So good things, like happy things that give you joy, they fill that bucket. And there are things that dip your bucket, or people that dip your bucket. Some people, their energies are just not a good match for you. And so once you finish the interaction with them, always leaves you feeling like depleted, right? They kind of they dip from your bucket, right? And so that we all need to know what fills our bucket, and we all need to know the things that deep it as well. So that when that bucket is beginning to rattle, and when things are like, then you're like, okay, I need to step back. It's that realignment.
Yeah.
It's understanding that we're made up of different parts, and that when one part is out of sync, it impacts the other parts.
Yeah.
And so I always share that concept, even when the adults like, hey, how's your bucket? You know, you have to kind of, and it's more or less like, how is your soul? What's going on inside, apart from the external things?
I use this concept of a well, because if you don't fill up the well, there's nothing to be given out of the well, because it has to be a constant flow. Yes, self-care is extremely important. Yeah. I mean, Yejide, I could continue talking to you for hours. It's such a pleasure, but we do have to come to an end. So, and now, of course, I know that my listeners would like to know where to find your work. Of course, the question, other than the book, A Good Name, are there any other projects that you're envisioning?
Yes, I have one adult novel that's finished. But I have some editing to do. So it's called In Our Own Ways. So I'm excited about that. It's entirely set in Nigeria. And so I'm excited about that. I have 2 children's books all written as well. And I have some short stories. I'm always writing something.
Like breathing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not right.
That's my thing. You know, that's my way of processing. It really grounds me, makes me happy. So I'm always writing something. So I'm excited. And you and I have had this conversation before. I'm hoping I can go back to school. I'm excited about that. I mentioned earlier about education. So I'm hoping that I can go back to school as well. So so I'm excited about the near future.
And where can my listeners find you? Facebook is that, Instagram? Which profiles would you prefer?
Oh, because I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. I have a website, so yejidekilanko.com. I promised myself a long time ago that when people take time out of their day to email me or write me, that I respond back to them. My books are sold on your local retailers, wherever you are in the world. If they don't have it, they can request it, and it's also online. But I'm very thankful to everyone who's joined us today. I'm thankful to you, Godana, for having me. It's always an honor and pleasure to talk about my writing, about my life, and because I'm like, somebody's, you feel like, they're interested in what I have to say.
Very much so. Thank you so much. It was truly a pleasure having you. And dear listeners, please note that you can find Yejide's links also in my profile and on the profiles of Grounded Press on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Thank you so much again. And this was today's conversation with Mother Earth, brought to you by Grounded Press. Next week, we are going to London to visit the Bug Woman of London. Sounds scary? Not at all. She is an incredible woman who will take us on an adventure. So stay tuned and join us again.